All right, all right, all right. We don't gotta fix no. Let me make sure. Let me make sure. Let me make sure. You know, you never can be too careful. Don't want to just start yapping and niggas can't hear shit. So why the fuck would I waste my time? Okay, let's check. Let me go to fucking. You don't gotta fix no. Perfect. You can hear me. All right, all right. So as you can see by the title, we finna be watching that new episode Joel just dropped on NXR Studios with Nick. And then we're gonna, if we have enough time, we'll get into the rest of Uncensored with Myron, and then watch Nick's take on Andrew talking about the situation from a super chat. All right, so actually, we might just watch that first since it's only 10 minutes, and then just finish out with the Nick thing. So yeah, let's see what let's watch that first, get that out the way, and since it should be quick, depending on what he talks about. But yeah, let's get right into the show. Shit.
The bitch shaking it, showing it. You this, you that. We laughing at them together. Oh! So stop treating these mother like they mean something.
Let's go to TikTok. All right, now let's react to Nick talking about the Andrew situation because he got a super chat from us, so I wanted to see what his take was on it. Cause again, I like both Andrew. I like everybody in that group, but I understand why Andrew said what he said, and I understand why Sneeko said what he said and did what he did on his, and like says what he says. So it's like it's hard to choose a side, so that's why I don't choose sides. So if anything, I want to say I hope Andrew is just saying that because he doesn't want to get thrown back in jail in Romania, if anything. But it is kind of weird that he just keeps like going in on them, especially like if you actually saw the podcast with him and Steiny, then you would understand what I'm talking about. But let's see what Nick says about it.
How do you do that? That isn't right. And it doesn't even make any sense. So you start your show and you push that message.
Bobby Roy, $20. I get that Tate is in a tough spot, but honestly, fuck him. I rolled in the mud with the pigs, nigga fist bumped Steiny and called him a top G. Crying face emoji, crying face emoji.
Yeah, I didn't really appreciate that remark. I'll just be charitable and assume that he misspoke. It was just an idiom. I didn't really appreciate that.
Right, facts.
I've been out here defending him. And if he wanted to go and say he didn't play the song, well, that's technically true. And if he wanted to go out and say that he's being unfairly blamed for it, I don't disagree with that. And if he doesn't want to double down, well, I understand you got to do what you got to do. But I don't like all these little sneak disses. Why throw us under the bus?
Yeah.
I don't like this. I was rolling around in the mud with pigs, and the only reason anyone cared is because I was there, and they're just doing it for clicks. It's like, why are we to blame now? Now we're at fault. What is that? Blame Patrick Bet-David. Patrick Bet-David sat you down for the humiliation ritual. Blame the media. They're the ones that, if you want to say the media blew it out of proportion, yeah, that's what happened. But so I don't know what that's all about. I love Andrew Tate. I consider him a good friend. I'm not going to crash out on him because he made some throwaway remark on a podcast.
Right.
I didn't like how it sounded. I'll be charitable and I'll assume that he misspoke because I have a lot of respect for him and he's a good guy, but didn't love that. Didn't love it.
Beer bandit.
Facts. So yeah, this was quick. Exactly why we watched it first. But anyways, yeah, like Nick said, it just like he said, I like Andrew. I definitely have respect for Andrew in the sense of what he talks about. But I just didn't like how he just kept digging into them, like digging in, like instead of like trying to throw the blame elsewhere, he's just trying to blame them. So it's just like I didn't like that. But like Nick said, we're not gonna crash out. But that's why he doesn't like Sneeko, because Sneeko goes and crashes out. and makes a 30-minute video about how Andrew Tate is. So that's why it's like I understand why I get why they both are going at it like that, but yeah, it's just weird that he does that. But we're not going to crash out. It's not that serious. Anyways, let's get into the main course. The particular sins of particular people with Joel and Nick. Let's see what they got to talk about today.
Just a little bit different. I'm going to kind of as a launching pad, read something that I wrote and then just give you the floor. You could talk literally the rest of the entire episode. So if you can just give me maybe 2-3 minutes to get the thought out. And then I want to hear what you think. Because some of this I've heard you say, and you've been, of this mind longer than I have. And so it's like, hey, I've been J-pilled for 15 minutes, and what do you think, Nick? So if I could do that, is that all right?
Sounds good.
Okay, here we go. Diagnosis. I believe that by way of divine providence, the earth is filled with not only unique individual people, but unique and distinct peoples, nations, race, etc. I'm not a fatalist or a determinist. I believe that people can change. I also believe peoples can change, that groups of people can change, but this happens slowly over the course of generations. I also believe it is biblically permissible and in some cases even righteous, since we are commanded to exercise godly discernment, to recognize or to notice different strengths and weaknesses of both individual people and collective peoples. Regarding collective peoples, this discernment should be understood as a viewpoint regarding generalities. It's not universal, there's always exceptions. All right. Furthermore, in terms of general weaknesses, I believe those of European descent are generally marked, at least modern Europeans today, generally marked by cowardice, moral passivity, and suicidal empathy. They regularly are content to prioritize the foreigner over even the welfare of their own children. Boomers, though not all boomers, have displayed this particular trait to the uttermost. Furthermore, I believe those of Jewish descent are generally marked by subversion, deceit, and greed. Exceptions, but a general weakness. Politically speaking, I believe Israel has had devastatingly negative influence on America, and I do not want our children to fight their wars, and I do not want them lobbying in our politics or having an outsized influence on our culture. Religiously speaking, I believe that Judaism is antichrist. I believe it is not only evil, but a pernicious evil. I fully recognize that many Jews are secular and do not practice Judaism. However, just as many Americans today do not profess to be Christian, America was profoundly shaped by Christian thought and Christian values. Likewise, Israel has been deeply shaped by a religion that has at its foundation a complete rejection of Christ. Therefore, a people shaped by a rejection of the Logos, literally a rejection of logic. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That rejection, they will have, at least to some degree, a hostility towards God's natural order, not just Christ, but the world that Christ made. They will resist and at times even seek to subvert natural distinctions and natural hierarchy. This is why I furthermore believe that liberalism, at least in its modern form, especially in the 20th century, is largely a Jewish project.
Yep.
The engine of liberalism is egalitarianism, the quest to flatten all natural distinctions, men and women, individuals, and even nations. I believe that liberalism, especially modern liberalism, is arguably the single biggest threat to the world, and particularly America, and the church today. And I believe that Israel is one of the most adamant proponents and defenders of liberalism. Prescriptions? What do? Number one, I believe a godly Christian can hold all the views I mentioned above without sin. I firmly reject any ideology that would mistreat or persecute an entire people. I do not support those who would call for physical harm or violence to a particular people.
Facts.
Universally, collectively, every single one of them, without fair trials and the objective proof of individual guilt of an actual crime and not merely sin. Those who follow me on Fed posts about physically harming Jews are either Feds, bots, or retarded. You will be promptly blocked. Second, I want to see a national ban on pornography, exorbitant forms of usury that prey on the poor, and dual citizenship from any country for those who hold civil office here in America, but I recognize that this would disproportionately affect Jews. And then third, I believe that many individual people and collective peoples would humanely self-deport if we banned those things I have before mentioned. I further believe that these people groups would self-deport disproportionately. Jews in America would leave, I believe, at a higher rate than other groups, with many Jews who truly love our country and our values choosing to stay behind. And then lastly, I want to see America break ties with Israel in terms of geopolitics. I do not believe that they are our ally. That's pretty much my position on Jews. What do you think?
Hi.
Pretty
Got this
spot
old
on,
thing
brother. You know what
and
you're
the
talking
bill
about.
from the store before I got it. Figured you
I agree with a lot of that. And I agree with the lens interpreting the relationship between Christians and Jews through the lens of civilizations. Because that's really how I started to think about the issue. Is when I got started becoming a conservative, the phrase I always heard was Judeo-Christian.
Right.
And I think that's really the beginning of it for a lot of people, is people hear this repeated over and over, Judeo-Christian values, Judeo-Christian civilization. They say Western civilization's Judeo-Christian. And a lot of times when people think about what a conservative is or right-wing is, they say it's Judeo-Christian. And for me, when I turned roughly 18, I thought about the term because I didn't just mindlessly repeat this. I said, how actually can this be? Is this not a contradiction in terms? Because to be Jewish is to reject Christ.
Literally, if you don't understand what Judaism is, it means that they don't believe that Jesus died on the cross. They think he is in hell burning in excrement. Okay, that's what they believe that Jesus is doing. They believe God didn't come back yet, still hasn't come back, and they really believe they gotta like make some big old sacrifice and then he'll come back. But anyways, yeah, they don't believe in Jesus. Well, they believe in Jesus. They just believe he wasn't the son of God. He just was like a nigga who practiced witchcraft or some shit. Like,
Right.
To be a Christian is to embrace Christ. And
right.
people don't typically think of it
Not
this way.
only embrace Christ, but to understand that he is God.
But Judaism forks when Christ arrives. Christianity comes from Judaism and emerges from Judaism. And then what we call Judaism today emerges from the events of the Passion, which is the splitting of the veil, the destruction of the temple, the expulsion of the Jews from the Holy Land, and the end of temple worship as the Jewish people. And so from that Jewish community, you get the Christians, and then you get the Jews. And what's really interesting about the term, there's the theological contradiction, which is that some embraced Christ and said there's no need for the temple sacrifice. We have the ultimate sacrifice. The others said one day we'll return, we'll rebuild the temple, we'll come back to the Holy Land. Outside the obvious theological contradiction is the history, which I don't even think people know. Because when you hear Judeo-Christian, you tend to think that things have always been the way they are in America. Because in the United States of America, you've had, with some exceptions, notably, Christians and Jews largely living together, especially for the past 100 years, and Jews being assimilated. For the most part, we think they're assimilated into America. But the history of Europe, could you imagine going back to the 1500s and telling the Jews and Christians then about a Judeo-Christian civilization? They would say, I don't know what you're talking about. Because for thousands of years, the historical experience of the Jews and Christians is that they've been in conflict.
Yep.
Basically in a state of constant conflict, starting with the Roman Empire's destruction of the temple, the Jewish rebellions led against the Roman Empire, and then the expulsion of the Jews from Palestine. That's how it starts. And I learned about this after I started to see there were a few notable pictures. I think one was posted by Brett Weinstein, or maybe his brother Eric, of him flipping off the Arch of Titus in Italy. There he is flipping off. It's a point of view. He's showing his middle finger to the arch. And I said, what's going on in this picture? And the Arch of Titus is built to commemorate the attack. Well, not the attack, but the suppression of the rebellion by the Jews in Israel, taking their stuff, pushing the people out. According to the Jews, hundreds of thousands died. They talk about it like it's another Holocaust, basically, but this one happened 2,000 years ago. And many people don't even know about these events, that this was extremely traumatic, extremely violent. This is how really you could argue medieval and then modern civilization begins, is with an attack or suppression by the Roman Empire against the Jews, which they never forgot. And they still talk about it to this day.
You, just you,
They don't ever
building
forget
your
shit.
app
God damn it.
on base 44.
Warning: this product contains but not the
I did a debate with a rabbinical Kabbalistic Jew named Adam King, and he believes that underneath the Vatican are all the treasures that the Roman Empire stole from Israel. They're like giant menorah, their library. He believes that when the Jewish Messiah comes, he will destroy modern Rome, which is the church, and Western Europe, which is sort of interesting because if you're being told about this Judeo-Christian civilization, it seems like these are in conflict, actually.
Yeah.
The Roman Empire and Israel from the start. Then the Jews are expelled. And to me, this is maybe the most essential characteristic, is that they're a wandering people. Unlike the Franks, the Goths, the Romans, they're a people with no homeland, no native land to call their own. So they're dispersed from Palestine into Europe, and they're unwelcome there because they're ethnic outsiders, religious outsiders, and they're a minority. This is what shapes their experience in Europe. And as a minority in many of these Western kingdoms, they're not given the same rights. They're not integrated. We tend to think, and again, this is our bias, that everything is like America. Everything is tolerant. Everyone's integrated and assimilated. People don't realize that for thousands of years, Jews existed segregated from everybody else in their own communities, speaking a different language with their own courts, their own laws, different rights under the law, different roles. In many countries, their land ownership was restricted.
Right.
Couldn't have certain positions, couldn't be farmers.
Which is why they kind of geared towards banking.
Money changing, right. They were, in many cases, artisans, craftsmen. They were segregated into specific towns as opposed to the countryside or the major cities. And through this segregation, naturally, they come into conflict with the Christian hosts. And for hundreds of years, again, this is something that's kind of becoming known now. People talk about 108, 109 countries they've been expelled from. For hundreds of years, they are being literally expelled wholesale from entire nations, from England, Spain, France, Italy. For hundreds of years, there were no Jews living in England because King Edward in 1290 said Jews are banned from living here, and they all leave. And until 1650, not a single Jew resides in the entire country. So for hundreds of years, they're being forcibly converted, expelled, segregated. There's a dual law, like an apartheid system. They have different rights and laws. And over the years, they're always moving around from Palestine into Western Europe, from Western Europe to the Netherlands, Netherlands back to England, many of them moving over to Poland, then in Russia. And throughout this time, they're subject to what they call a blood libel, angry mobs, pogroms, all these different abusive policies. This is a Judeo-Christian civilization. Now, maybe Jews and Christians lived side by side for thousands of years, and it's certainly a complicated history, and it's a diverse and it's a long history. But the idea that it's a unified history, that it's a hyphenated history, it has no basis in reality, and I think people just don't know the facts. And over this time, it engenders, of course, deep resentment, and it goes both ways. And what's interesting is that in modern times, of course, it's like everything else. We always talk about racism and anti-Semitism, but it's only ever proceeding from white Christian men. White Christian men are inherently violent and cruel and prejudiced against the Africans, against Muslims, against the indigenous, against the Jews. But that hatred goes both ways. The indigenous Americans were at war with the colonizers and scalped them and skinned them alive. The Muslims took Christian slaves and were at war and invaded Europe. Similarly, the Jews they were expelled. They were treated with cruelty. They were segregated. And that engendered a lot of hatred among them against the Romans, against ethnic Europeans, against Christians. And you see this in many of the controversies. One of the criticisms of the Jews is they said that they would sacrifice Christian children or that they would kill Christians. I don't find that hard to believe.
Meet Canceline. She's a
Yeah.
credit record.
Only thing I was gonna say about damn. And what the fuck does this nigga just say? This fucking goofy ass commercial fucked me up.
Jews are, they said that they would sacrifice Christian controversies. One of the criticisms of the Jews is they said that they would sacrifice Christian children against the Romans, against ethnic Europeans, against Christians. And you see this in many of the controversies. One of
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know why people just think white people are bad. I want to say no, nobody's good. So let's just keep it that way. Nobody is just inherently good. No race that you can think of is just good, I promise you.
the criticisms of the Jews is they said that they would sacrifice Christian children or that they would kill Christians. I don't find that hard to believe. I think that if Jews are a minority, the wandering minority, if they're being subjected to a double standard in the law, if they're being segregated, is it outside the question that they hate their Christian hosts, that they might kill some of them? They might do it in secret or in a conspiratorial way? I don't find that hard to believe. And so 2,000 years characterized as Judeo-Christian, in reality, it's a history of Jewish-Christian conflict. And it happens to be occurring, the venue for this is Europe and Christendom, but there's never an integration, ever. It's not until the 19th century, when Napoleon arrives, and people don't even know the history on this. Napoleon, with his French Revolution and the Napoleonic Legal Code, emancipates the Jews. And for hundreds of years prior to that, the Jews are living in these segregated towns where they have their own courts, they have their own laws, they speak Yiddish. They don't have the same rights. Napoleon comes along, emancipates them, and for the first time in Western Europe, they're allowed to integrate and assimilate. And as Napoleon invades Europe in the Napoleonic Wars, he brings the legal code with him as he sweeps across Western, Central, Eastern Europe, emancipating and liberating the Jews. And so the situation in the late 19th century, which is kind of where the current situation emerges, is this. The vast majority of Jews are actually living in Russia because the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth before that, that was the only place the Jews were given full legal equality. So all the Jews that were expelled and kicked out of Western Europe, most of them end up in Poland and Lithuania, which is then annexed by Russia. So they find themselves mostly in Russia because of this historic situation. After Napoleon's wars, there's some Jews in Western Europe, and they begin to become powerful because of assimilation. They start to identify as English, French, German. They serve in parliament. They have professional jobs. They become nationalistic for the various countries. They become very rich and powerful. So you have a small minority of Jews, assimilated, rich, powerful, living in Western Europe. Most of them, however, are living in the Pale of Settlement in Russia. They're living in these shtetls, in towns. They're being attacked by angry mobs. The Tsar of Russia hates them.
Yeah, I was about to say, that's why they
And
killed
the
him.
Jews of Europe are in this predicament where it seems that in the West, they're becoming assimilated and may disappear. But in the East, it's untenable because they're constantly being accused of murdering Christians or constantly being attacked by the government and by angry mobs. This is where Zionism is born. And the Zionists say, we will never be safe unless we have our own country. We'll never protect our own identity unless we have our own country. We need a place where we can be safe. We need a place where we could be Jewish. We need a place where we could be safe as Jews. And so they resolve at the end of the 19th century then to colonize Palestine. Now, at the same time in Russia, the situation is heating up. The pogroms are intensifying, attacks on Jews are intensifying, and the conditions are very bad. The country is poor in general. The autocracy is failing. They start fleeing to the United States. And so what happens in the 20th century is that the Jews, who used to mostly live in Russia and some in Western Europe, now they're heading to the United States. And the United States becomes the capital of Jewry. And increasingly, as they settle Palestine, Israel becomes another center of power. And it's only in the last 100 years that you have this situation where most of the world's Jews are living in America and in Israel. And now that we have this arrangement between America and Israel, of America supporting Israel and Israel influencing America, it's only in this context, and especially since World War II, that now they push this calculated line that we've always been together, that Jews and Christians have always gotten along throughout the history of Western civilization like they have in the last, let's say, 70 years in America. But that was never the case. And so I would say that when you...
America is a brand new country.
When you sort of understand, and that's just a very rough sketch, when you understand the history of Jews and Europeans, you realize that we might be able to coexist, but we can never truly integrate because Jews are not Christians and they're not Europeans. And they never identified that way. And as a matter of fact, they're hostile to both.
St. Jude is real. St. Jude does exactly
Not
what
only
St.
are
Jude
they
says
hostile,
it's gonna do.
their religion teaches them to be that way to them, to both.
Theologically inconsistent with Christianity, and historically have animosity against the Europeans.
For those of you who may not be aware, I have the immense
Yo, what the hell is this? Okay, no, stop.
Many encyclicals on this over the years they call As the Jews. They say that Jews will not have access to salvation without Christ. It's still, there's one door. It says, but we should not forcibly convert them. We should give them dignity and respect. They should have basic rights. But we also do recognize that they are subversive because they're disconnected from Christ. They're disconnected from God. And so I guess my position, to sum it up, is that like you, I don't want to be cruel against Jews. I don't hate them. I don't want to destroy them. I don't even think that's possible. We consider them a witness people. They're a witness to the crucifixion. But certainly we have to recognize them as fundamentally aliens and outsiders. And I don't think we should try to assimilate them. I don't think we can. But certainly we can't treat them as indistinguishable from other Christians or other Europeans.
Right. I agree. It's a pretty massive difference. And yet, with all these other false religions that are demonic in their own right, all false religions lead to hell. It's like with every false religion, Christians, stand strongly, adamantly against it. And yet we have this weird carve out. Whereas, I feel like the argument can be made that Islam has a view of Christ. They deny his deity. They don't believe that he's God, but they still esteem him as a prophet. And I despise Islam. But my point is that Islam sees Jesus as a pretty good guy. Buddhism sees Jesus as a pretty good guy. Hinduism sees Jesus as a pretty good guy. Judaism sees Jesus in hell.
Which is why I don't get mad at my Muslim brothers. I know y'all worship that sand demon, but y'all don't disrespect Jesus. You see him as a good guy, so I don't get mad at y'all. As angry as I get it, as angry as I am at Judaism, I don't get too mad at y'all. Okay, that's why we can have our conversations. But
a blasphemer, maybe some human excrement thrown in there. Depending what you're reading, and we pick that false religion of all the false religions to be our greatest ally as Christian nations, as Christian people. It just doesn't make sense.
No, and I don't even think people understand the lengths that they go to, the Jews, and their hatred of Christians. People don't even realize they hate Christians. But if you go through, and I have not read the Talmud. This is always the gotcha, because they say, have you read the Talmud? And they say it's thousands of pages, and it mostly deals with, it's a legal code. It's rabbis debating how to interpret the various commandments in the Old Testament. And so they say most of it is pretty, it's minutia. It's
That's true.
trivial. But if you read even some of what Israelis or Jews write about the Talmud, it's very clear that the way that the rabbinical Jewish religion sees Christians is as idolaters.
Yep.
Which is interesting because that is the same reason that Muslims hate Christians. Because I've debated with some Muslims, and there's some commonalities, like you said. I think Muslims are more sympathetic to Christians because they consider us people of the book, and they consider Christ to be a prophet. They consider him to be a Messiah, technically.
Right.
They can't really define what Messiah means. They consider him like a major prophet, which prefigures Muhammad. But why they theologically disagree with Christianity is they believe in Tawhid, which is one God. That's why they raise the finger.
Right.
It's all about Allah. And so they see the triune God, the Holy Spirit and Jesus Christ, as a form of idolatry. So
because they claim the Trinity is 3 different people, and it's not 3 different people.
Formal problem they have is that we're idolaters.
I'm Disguised Toast. I'm a Valorant streamer, and I'm also an esports team owner.
Jews view us in exactly the same way because they, worshiping Yahweh, see the deification of Christ as a form of idolatry. And what they interpret in the Talmud from the Old Testament is that they cannot praise idolaters. So it says you cannot say kind things about Christians. It says you have to spit when passing their cemeteries or their houses of worship. You can't enter into one of their houses of worship. And they will even go into, they say some sects of Christianity, they will go into the house of worship if they don't see Christ as God, because that is where they draw the line. And it extends even further into intermarrying. It extends further into killing. They believe that if an idolater is in peril and might die, a Jewish person has no obligation to save them because they see idolaters as the enemy. And there is something interesting about the Old Testament and the New Testament, and you're the expert. I'm not a theological expert on this or a biblical expert by any stretch. I don't believe, although it's prefigured, I don't believe that you see an explicit message in the Old Testament that's all about forgiveness and turning the other cheek. I don't think you see a message like, forgive them, they know not what they do. You see a lot more of the Amalekites need to be destroyed, kill the women, the children, salt the earth. And I think that's borne out in the way the Israelis treat the Palestinians and the way that they treat the former Nazis who they hunted down or any of their enemies. And so what you have is a religion, which many Jews today are very secular, but regardless, for thousands of years, their religion is literally set against, with a seething hatred against Christ and Christianity. And there's no identity that can be achieved between us.
That's why I don't complain about, that's why I don't go too hard about the Muslims in Dearborn. Okay? Do we need to handle that situation? Yeah. But we have a bigger situation to handle. We got some niggas that actually fucking hate our guts.
That's not a little brother or an older brother. That's adversarial.
Right. I agree. Yeah, that's part of what I was reading at the beginning. I mean, you can go to, nations all over the world and, you can tell, one pastor said, you can tell which nations have been affected by Christendom by simply coming to a 4-way stop and seeing how they handle it. Is it might makes right, or is there even the concept of courtesy or order, organization, those kinds of things. And I just, that people will say, well, so many Jews don't even practice Judaism. And that's true. But in the same way that we have so many people in America that have not ever darkened the doorway of a church in their entire lives, or maybe they've gone once or twice and would not even profess to be Christians, much less living like one. Still, just by virtue of being born and raised in America, whether you're conscious of it or not, every American has been shaped by Christian thought, Christian values, Christian doctrine. We take these things for granted. We just think that we're enlightened, and that it somehow just always was, but it wasn't. these things had to be learned. We had to learn courtesy. We developed, we improved, we had to be shaped, and it was religion that shaped us. And so I think every, culture, the Latin word cultus, worship, every single society, every nation, every people, their culture is very much shaped by their religion, whether future generations are adherent practicers of the religion or not. So to say that, because that's kind of the excuse that I'll hear a lot of people, Christians, using to try to carve out, exceptions and make defenses for Jews, is they'll say, well, yeah, I guess hatred of Jesus Christ.
I was it's hatred for Christianity. So it's like, it's not that we don't like the Jews. It's that they just religiously are like taught not to fuck with us. So we can't it's hard to just ignore it because they're taught to not like us. So
it's a hatred of Jesus Christ. And then even when you look at the Talmud, which is 6,000 pages, there's the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud. And so I understand that it's different than the Bible. They, certain passages would have more weight and trump other passages of the Bible or the Talmud. But the whole practice, it's litigation. It's what Judaism is. It's so fundamentally, it's a rejection and hatred of Christ. And in addition to that, it's, it really is the religion of lawyers. It really is. Yes. It makes sense that, the Jews, going into banking, or going into to legal profession. But and even when Jesus arrived, that's another thing that I think Christians miss is when Jesus arrives on the scene in his earthly ministry, Judaism is already off the rails, right? So after the book of Malachi at the end of the Old Testament, it says the word of the Lord was rare and the skies had turned to brass or bronze, meaning that for 400 years, in between kind of the completion of the prophets and the coming of Christ, you have 400 years where God is pretty much silent. And during those 400 years, the religious rulers in Israel got busy, and the word of the Lord is rare, and there's not a lot of divine intervention during that time, and they start constructing their own way of doing things. So when Jesus shows up, notice he doesn't say. People always think of legalism. They'll think the problem, is legalist. Pharisees are legalist. Jesus' favorite word for the Pharisees and the Sanhedrin, Sadducees, the lawyers, it literally said scribes and lawyers, bean counters. That's what they were. His favorite word was not, oh, you legalist. It was, oh, you hypocrites. He even says, do as they say, but not as they do. And then he begins to tell how they've twisted the law of God. It's not that they cared too much for the law of God. That's the point I'm trying to make. And this is 2,000 years ago. So 400 years of God being quiet, Judaism getting, way off the rails already 2,000 years ago in Christ coming. And it's even then, Jesus is not saying you care so much for the law of God. No, it's the traditions and laws of men that you've placed heavy burdens on the people, and you've added all your commentary. Like whenever Jesus is preaching, the crowds, the gospel narratives will always say, they marveled because he spoke as one who had authority.
If you had told Stephen, as stones were crushing his body, that he was dying for a shared Judeo-Christian foundation, he would have called it blasphemy.
Imagine being able to build anything just by thinking about it. Meet
like,
Base
what the fuck?
44.
Standing about his opinion, it's like, well, what does that mean? Like when Jesus spoke, was it just like the dude had aura? Maybe, but Isaiah also says there was nothing outstanding about his appearance that we should, it's like Jesus didn't have the paint. He didn't have a glow. His divinity was concealed. The Mount of Transfiguration, the human nature is pulled back temporarily, and the divine, becomes apparent. But other than that, when Jesus speaks with authority, it's not like a supernatural, his voice is, several decimals higher than the average human voice, or no, it's his manner of speaking. And what most commentators and biblical scholars will say is that what made his speaking distinct from all the Jewish leaders and authoritative is that they would always have to appeal to someone else. They say, well, Rabbi so-and-so says, and Rabbi, and so like long before they ever got to Moses, it would be, you know, like, well, the law, Moses says this, and so added this, and so commentating on so-and-so added this and this and this. And so then by the time you, like the telephone game, by the time you get to the Jews, and again, this is at Jesus's time, it's, well, you know, it's not swearing by the temple, but swearing by the gold of the temple. And then you're bound to your oath. Or, you know, it's not swearing by this, but if you swear by that, then you have to keep your word. It, like, basically the equivalent of like a toddler saying yes to his mom and dad when they give him a command, but then not obeying. And when they question him, he said, well, I had my fingers crossed behind my back. Like classic Jewish move, you know, just classic. But my point is, that was at the time of Jesus. That was at the time of Jesus. So Jesus shows up and he's like, this isn't Judaism. This is not worship of the true God. This is not Moses. And so then Jesus would just cut through all the BS and get right back to the source, you know? And so when Jesus says, you have heard it said, but I tell you, he's not pitting himself against Moses. He's like, Moses spoke for God. He was a genuine prophet. But he's saying, you've heard it said, meaning all your rabbis, all your commentators, and the ways that they twisted and perverted Moses. But I'm going to get back to the source. And now we're 2,000 years removed even from that, with 6,000 page Talmud and all these different things where, like, you can drive around on the Sabbath because we put a wire outside of the city of Manhattan, and that counts as a wall. And so technically you're never leaving your house because it's a big house. Cool. You know, like, and it's like, that is so Jewish, you know, like that. Yeah. And so Judaism, I guess those two big things I would say. Number one, fundamentally a rejection of Christ, and Christ is the Word. That's what I was trying to get at. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the word there, like God. Even in the Greek, it's the Logos. He is the logic, right? Faith, Christian faith, and reason are not at odds with one another. And so, like, God made an orderly world because He's a God of order. He's a logical God. The rejection of the living logic is that, if that's a fundamental characteristic of a people, that's going to be, those people are going to be wild, right? That's like, that's like, really, like, hey, we're starting a civilization. What's it founded on? The rejection of logic. Right. Okay. And so, like, what are you going to be doing? We're going to be clipping coins. That's not the only thing we're going to try to divide. We'll also try to split the atom. You know, like, I mean, like the things that they gravitate towards is like, could we blow up? I mean, we can blow up a town, but could we blow up a whole country? You know, let's get our best scientists on it. You know, and these kind of, you know, and even so much of the wealth building is just, it's literally splitting the penny. Like, hey, a real transaction just took place where someone had a tangible good that they worked for, and someone else bought it at a reasonable price. But what if us producing nothing could come in and take a piece of this somehow, you know, like, right. But that's like, that is Jewish. That is the Pharisees. It's the heart of it. It's like, how can I gave someone my word, but I don't actually want to keep it. I swore by the temple. Oh, but I didn't swear by the gold of the temple, you know, like, and Jesus is calling them out for this back then. But now it's been 2,000 years of rejecting him. And 2,000 years without even being able to practice biblical Judaism. There's no temple. There can be no sacrifice. Like, and we think it would be better. So now, you know, after rejecting Jesus for 1,900 years, right, coming to the end of the 19th century, now we're ready for a partnership, Judeo-Christian. It literally doesn't make any sense. What I guess my question is, how did that switch? Like, because Europeans, Christians kind of knew what was up for a long time. Even the Protestants, right? Martin Luther, last book he wrote, The Jews and Their Lies, you know, like he kind of knew what was up. Because they would go in, the Reformers, because the Vulgate, the Latin, you know, Catholic Bible, the Reformers were pretty suspicious of you guys, you know, and like, I think they changed some of the language. And so we need to go back to the original manuscripts and learn the Hebrew. Well, nobody knew the Hebrew. So the Reformers actually, kind of our fault a little bit, but like, we kind of brought in some of the Jews.
Right.
And we brought them in because we needed them to teach us how to read the Hebrew, because we didn't trust the Catholics. But then Luther, you know, once learning how to read the Hebrew, and I mean, that's one of the big things that Luther did, was he put the Bible in the vulgar, right? Just the common tongue of German.
Yeah.
And which Catholics did not want people being able to read the Bible. I have some things that I could say about that, but so he does it.
So difference. So basically, if you guys don't have any history, if y'all don't have if y'all don't know your history, basically, the Reformation happened because Catholics didn't like regular people reading the Bible or knowing the Bible, and they like to have like the Pope basically, or like a bishop, read the Bible to you, and they're supposed to tell you what the Bible says, and you're supposed to just believe what they say. And also what was happening was when you do confessions, right? When you do confessions, you're supposed to go to the Pope or the priest and confess your sins. And in Catholicism, basically, okay, so in Catholicism, you have heaven and hell, and you have purgatory as well. So if you say you were good all your life and you did something bad at the end, right, you might have 5 years in purgatory. But if you went and confessed your sins and you gave a certain amount of money, the priest or the Pope would like expunge those years from purgatory. Like he would expunge those years of purgatory from you, and you would be okay. So what was happening was the Catholic Church was getting a lot of people to where they were basically telling them, hey, give us this much money and we'll expunge this amount of time from purgatory. So you don't have to really read the Bible or pray or nothing. As long as you just give us this money and you confess, you're going to heaven. So that's why the Reformation happened, because Martin Luther was like, I thought the Lord said by faith only we can go to heaven, not by works. And you're getting to heaven by works right now, because you're literally paying the priest to do confessions so you can get out of purgatory. Boom.
And he makes some Jewish pals along the way, but now he can read and speak Hebrew. And so then he's like, well, let's read your book. And reads the Talmud, and is like,
shout out to Martin Luther.
Right.
And that's what kept happening with the reformers, is like they would befriend Jews to help them get back to the original Hebrew for Bible translations and different languages and commentaries and things like that. And then they would take that knowledge now that the Jews gave them, and then they would read the Jewish religious text, and then they would kick out the Jews.
Right.
And it became, kind of a cycle of happening again and again. But the point is, the Catholics, even the reformers, especially the early ones like Luther, Europeans, not non-Christian Europeans, everybody kind of was like, yeah, the Jews are not our greatest ally.
Right.
Until what happened? What's that until piece? Like, why did all of a sudden we do an about face?
I think by definition, it's liberalism. I think it was the advent of liberalism,
when
because what emancipated the Jews was revolutionary France. There was a Napoleonic legal code, and he recreated the Sanhedrin in Paris, literally recreated the Jewish leadership. And
How is my mother gonna... Oh, no. Is this the episode with the breakup?
Reba, we can't agree on a house.
Y'all need Realtor.com.
And it went back and forth. There was some pushback on the emancipation, and so the record of Napoleon is somewhat mixed on them. But I think it all goes back to the fall of the kings, the fall of the Catholic kings or the Christian kings of Europe. Because you're right, they called them disputations. The king would summon the rabbis, and they would summon the scholars. Originally, Judeo-Christian meant a Jew that became a Christian.
Right.
And these so-called Judeo-Christians would alert the Christians at the time, like today, they saw the Jews as like the older brother.
Right.
Like, oh, well, they're brothers in the faith. They didn't understand.
But then a Jew would convert.
The Jew would convert.
And he'd be like, actually, this is what we've been saying about you this whole time. And the Christians were like, what?
Yeah. And then they
tell you,
would
because nobody
burn
knows
the
about the
Talmud
Talmud.
across Paris, Spain, Italy. And what was interesting is a few years back when the Notre Dame Cathedral caught fire, there were some prominent rabbis that said this is revenge for the burning of the Talmud in Paris.
Wow.
700 years ago.
Yeah. They don't forget.
No.
They
And
never
what's
forget.
funny about that is, of course, everyone blamed it on the Muslims. And maybe it was the Muslims because they vandalized churches, but they frequently missed it. It's the Jews that seem to like it. Sort of like on 9/11 when they caught an Israeli woman smiling and saying, well, now the Americans will understand what it's like to be Israeli. But anyway, going back to, why now, I think it really is the deferring of these religious disagreements. It's this moral cowardice not to proclaim that we have the truth because we have Christ.
Right.
And to me, it wasn't just the kind of apparent contradiction, which is they believe Christ is an imposter, a sorcerer, a bastard, and we believe he's God. It's that we believe he is the truth, and no one knows God. No one knows the truth without him.
That's right.
Without him shining a light on it. And so, like you said, if a people does not have that at all, but for thousands of years, the fruits are not going to be good. And well, if you look around today, like you said, from Marxism to the atom bomb to pornography, transgenderism, they seem to be at the fore of all these things because they lack that. So I believe that liberalism is probably at the source of all of it. It's and the downfall of any kind of Christian authority. Because and if you look throughout the Enlightenment,
that's insight, but we can talk more about that. But go ahead.
Certainly. It was the Jews that were, we talked about this, I believe, on another show. It was Baruch Spinoza in the 16th century who was in Amsterdam. And Amsterdam became a refuge for the Jews because it was the most liberal polity in Europe. You know, they were expelled from Catholic Spain. They were expelled from Catholic England. They were expelled from Catholic Italy. And they sought refuge in Amsterdam, the Dutch Republic, which was the most free speech, liberal place you could be. And that is where Baruch Spinoza came up with biblical criticism and began what some call the radical Enlightenment. And he said that the Bible and the Christian religion is just a moral skin suit on the raw power of the kings, of the absolute monarchs of Europe. And Spinoza's family undermined the Spanish king, the French king. It was always a critique of Christian power, always a critique of the Christian monarchs. And what's interesting is that even today, you look at some of the prominent Jews in the right wing, like let's say Joe Lonsdale, talked about this in another show too. Who does he idolize? Cyrus, who is the Messiah for the Jews. Curtis Yarvin, who does he idolize? Oliver Cromwell, who led the Protestant Republic in England, who let the Jews return to England against the monarchy, against the Christian monarchy of England. He wanted a liberal republic. So what you tend to find, and I haven't done enough of the deep dive, but for 500 years, you tend to find that attacks on the authority of the monarch, which comes from God, like the divine right of kings, liberalism, and the Jewish community, these things always tend to go together. They always tend to converge, whether it's Amsterdam, Paris, London, St. Petersburg in 1917, it's always the same. And so I would say that modernity, the Enlightenment, and the ascendancy of the Jews, these things are all happening reciprocally.
That's insightful. Like I said earlier, I think liberalism is one of the greatest enemies that we have right now in terms of like an ideology. And the engine of liberalism seems to be egalitarianism, the complete flattening of every natural distinction that God made into the world.
Right.
Distinctions between, men and women, distinctions between individuals, and distinctions between peoples, race, and nationality. Just every distinction you could think of. It's a rejection of the natural order, not just a rejection of Christian religion, but the natural order. And so liberalism seems to be that this radical equality at every level. No one is special. No one is above anyone else. It's a complete rejection of distinction. And without distinction, you necessarily are able to flatten all hierarchies. Because that's all, like hierarchies are the inevitable outflow of distinctions. But if everybody's the same, then it's not just androgyny, but it becomes egalitarian, equality. And so I feel like in some sense, I wonder if that's one of the reasons why Jews have had a particular affinity with America, because America, both on the religious and political side of the aisle, has been very egalitarian, right? Whether it's whether it's politically, it's like there is no king here. We're a republic at best, and I like republics. I wish we had one, but really, it's devolved rather quickly into a raw democracy,
Right.
you know, just mob rule. And then on the religious side, that's politically, but on the religious side, distinctly Protestant. Protestants don't do kings, you know, and most Protestant, you know, ecclesiastical polity is congregational, which is just the church polity equivalent of democracy.
Right.
You know, and especially Baptists, and I am a Baptist, but I have always found that peculiar. Like, why? Like, okay, so we believe, like, it's not like on Sunday we just sit in a circle and everybody gets 2 minutes to share. Like, we believe in a pastor. We believe that somebody would be more qualified and authoritative to share the word of God, to preach and to administer the sacraments. But when it comes to voting on decisions of the church, every single member of the church, including children in Baptist polity, get an equal vote. So you could have like a 9-year-old voting against their dad. It's like, what? You know, which is kind of crazy. And Catholics would never do that.
No.
I mean, what are you talking about? You know, like in Catholics, you always know who's in charge because of the size of their hat. You know, the bigger the hat, you know, like, and kind of that guy's, his hat's small. And well, we could go with that analogy a little bit more. The smallest hat gets kicked out of the country. 109 countries. But I wonder if, now obviously I'm a convicted Protestant, so I'd like to think that Protestants could figure this out. But I do wonder if you can correlate rejection of monarchs and rejection of an Episcopal, not Episcopalian, but it's called Episcopal polity. Episcopalians have it, Anglicans on the Protestant side have it, you know, and Catholics have it. But it's the idea of a hierarchical authority, right? Like you have, you know, Pope and cardinals and bishops and, you know, and so on and so forth. And there are Protestant versions of that. Like, it's not a coincidence that when England went Protestant, it didn't go Baptist. It didn't go Presbyterian. It went Anglican.
That's why it was weird when he kept saying, he said, I'm Protestant, and then he said I'm Baptist, because Protestant and Baptist are two different things. So that's why I was like, what are you, nigga? But
because Anglicans still understand
they're
hierarchy,
still in the same,
and they have that built into their politics. There actually is a ladder of authority. But I wonder with you know, that further rejection of hierarchy and distinction, and that happening simultaneously. I guess my point is, it was happening at the same time politically and religiously. Both the church and the state kind of relinquishing any acknowledgement of, some people are fit to rule, others are not. And some people are divinely appointed to rule, others are not. And as those things dissipate, all of a sudden, like it seems as though the West falls under this Jewish power.
Yeah. I definitely agree with what Joel and Nick were talking about today. That was definitely a good stream today. Especially breaking down how the Jews have been persecuted throughout history and why they have this mentality of, we need to have our own state, our own place where we could be safe from persecution. So I love the breakdown of history that we had today between Joel and Nick. It was really good. But yeah, nice breakdown today. It was not too long either. It was only like an hour. So that's what I like to see. Nothing too crazy. What's today? Wednesday. We'll be live Friday. I want to say we're gonna watch the Uncensored America. We'll probably finish that Friday, but let me see something. I want to say because I want to see what Sneeko is talking about, but
What is this?
I should say this. Oh God. Anyways, but yeah, we'll be live Friday, so hopefully that goes well. And yeah, if you have any questions or you want to come on the show and talk or debate, just let me know. I do not mind. I love having conversations with people and having discourse with other ideologies. But yeah, appreciate everybody for stopping by today. Nice little breakdown on why the Jews feel the way they do and why they can't coincide with Christian society. So yeah, Easy peasy. I will see y'all boys Friday. Peace.
The bitch shaking it, showing it. You this, you that. We laughing at them together. Oh! So stop treating these like they mean something.
Let's go to TikTok.